Are in this business and you have a thin skin, then you should decide you don't want to engage in opinions. Even though I have a thin skin, I've been engaging in opinions for quite some time now. What does disturb me, however, is that when I'm saying something and I'm misunderstood, I am not against the concept of an old age and survivors program. I'm not against the concept that wouldn't it be peachy keen dandy if everybody could get $1,000 a day. I mean, that would be great. I am, however, for sanity in trying to save a program that has grown like Topsy, all out of proportion to what it was intended to be. And therefore, I'm trying to save the Social Security program. But there's some people out there so paranoid, they write letters like this. Bob Grant, get off the air. You are sickening. You should be ashamed to go against the elderly getting Social Security. What kind of a man, what kind of a mean person are you anyway? The small pension that elderly are getting is nothing. How would you like to live like elderly, do, etc., etc.? This letter is so ill-conceived, blaming me for being against the elderly. I'm not against the elderly. She signs it, or he says, it looks like a lady's writing, but anyway. I hate you. Don't think you are so hot. You are sickening for lots of things you have said now and in past. I hate you. Well, dear hater, you may not know it, but people like me are the best friend Social Security has, because we're trying to inject some sanity into the program. You know, one of the reasons the program's in trouble? And don't get excited out there. I'm not going to mention names, but four of you gentlemen have told me, these are four different gentlemen I know who are very wealthy, who told me that your wives are getting Social Security now. They don't need it. They didn't work for it, but because of the changes Congress has made in the law, they are getting it. And that, sure, I'm only talking about four people who did not put anything into it, but are getting a lot out of it, who don't need it. But there are thousands and hundreds of thousands, and yes, even millions of people right now who are getting more than they deserve, more than they need. So don't tell me. That's just one of the reasons the program is in trouble.
There you are?
Yes.
Wouldn't there be a lot of money saved?
Yes. I mean, when I was telling you that there are many, many ways that we could make the system solvent, that was just one of the ways I was talking about. See, when the Social Security program was first started, it wasn't intended for mass murderers like David Berkowitz, who should have been executed.
Families.
Yeah. No, there is so much insanity in this country that I really do not believe we're going to survive into the 21st century unless a miracle happens and we get some politicians in Washington who say, hey, look, the things you folks, the things we have been doing to appeal to you folks to get your votes, some of them have been okay, but some of the other things have been ludicrous. We're going to get rid of all the ludicrous things whether you people like it or not. But, of course, that will never happen. That's why by the year 2000, as we know it, this country will cease to exist. You know, I know that people don't like me to say that. I don't know what they're afraid of. What do they think? I'm going to be, by saying we'll make it so?
Well, it's just...
Brother fan that you have, you only have two out here, but I think you may recognize the voice. Something that I think you're aware of, but the listeners are not. If an individual contributed to Social Security from 1937 to 1981 and contributed at the maximum for the entire years, and he became 65 in 1981, in 20 short months, he would have evaporated his entire contributions, And if he lived a normal life of 15 or 16 or 17 years, you can imagine what a devastation he would do to that pension.
Right.
It was never meant to make an individual live off the fat of the land. It was purposely a supplementary.
Person calls.
It's almost disappointing to hear you so calm. I remember years ago you weren't so calm. I guess we all get older.
Pal, you should see the hole I'm burning in my stomach trying to stay calm.
Yeah.
You know?
Glad you're back, and I'll be listening.
All right.
No, it won't. It won't. Look, I'm unique. Even eviscerated, I'm unique.
You are?
Yes. I mean, it's incredible. I know it sounds terribly conceited
It's all right.
and arrogant to say that, but I was told be honest, so I'm being honest.
It's true, and I really have appreciated you.
It does my heart good to know that there are some people like Marie out there who realize the time for free lunch is over. We never should have had it to begin with. And those of us who are trying to save Social Security know the only way to really save it is to save it with the truth, with honesty. And the Claude Peppers of this land are doing a great disservice. They are trying to fool people into thinking it would be like going up to an alcoholic and saying, all you need is another drink, pal. And that's the way the Claude Peppers handle the whole situation. It's shocking, absolutely shocking.
To me, there were those of us who really didn't anticipate what would happen in the Falklands, really didn't appreciate the stupidity of mankind. The fact of the matter is that the war is being fought for the most stupid of all reasons. National honor. I fail to see what national honor is to be gained. I know there are some people, one of my colleagues here, who says, we cannot let aggression be rewarded. Well, it sounds good, but I really don't see what sense there is in this idiocy. But then again, let's see what else. Oh, I'm sick and tired of these magazines. Valerina Bertinelli, how she lost £1 pound a day. I'm sick of it. But that's what sells magazines. Here's another one. Summer, the Fat Fighter Kit. Here's another. Now you can roll those inches away. Here's another. 5 exercises that blast belly bulge. Okay? And it goes on and on and on. But in just a moment, I want to address myself to something perhaps more important than even a belly bulge or Valerie Bertinelli losing £1 pound a day. The number is under heavy fire these days, not only from Democrats, but also from some members of his own party who feel he's being bullheaded about his budget. Mr. Reagan is holding out for less government. He remains convinced that this longing is shared by the vast majority of Americans who elected him by a landslide 19 months ago. The president, it seems, has a longer memory than most politicians. This was evident the other day in a speech in Washington when he reminded fellow Republicans why, while foes call him stubborn, he remains determined to rein in the growth of federal spending and the mammoth bureaucracy it has spawned. Listen to this from his speech. I quote, "Let's go to the American people. Let's remind them of the economic mess we faced when we took office in January of 1981. Inflation in double digits for 2 years in a row, back to back. First time in peacetime, interest rates that had hit, yes, 21.5%. Productivity and the rate of growth in the gross national product down for the 3rd year in a row. Let's remind them that in 1976, the inflation rate stood at 4.8%. By 1980, it was 2.5 times as high, 12.4. Let's remind them that in December of 1976, the prime rate averaged 6.4%. By December 1980, it reached 21.5%, a 200% increase. Let's remind them that when we took office, unemployment had been climbing and business failures increasing. When the recession hit us, it was our legacy from the years of boom and bust of erratic spending and monetary policy. Let's point out that for all of this, there's been one overriding cause. We've said it before. Let's say it again. Government is too big, and it spends too much money. In the last 10 years, federal spending tripled. In the last 5 years, federal taxes doubled, largely because of the growth of social programs. In 1950, the social programs cost the taxpayers $12 billion. In 1980, nearly $300 billion. That's an increase of an incredible 2,300%. In that same period, prices rose by 278%. So real social spending was actually 5.5 times higher than in 1950. By 1980, 1 out of every 3 American families was receiving federal assistance of one sort or another. 1 out of every 3 families. The budget for the Department of Health and Human Services, $250 billion, roughly the 3rd largest budget in the world, exceeded only by the total budgets of the Soviet Union and the United States. Just one social program as an illustration. 16 years ago, we were spending $65 million on food stamps. $65 million. In 1981, we spent $11.3 billion. Well, that's now include in this picture the interest payments on our tremendous federal debt that reached more than $1 trillion last year. The yearly interest payments are $100 billion, and that's as much as the entire federal budget was just 20 years ago. In fact, if you take the cost of automatic spending increases in entitlement programs, add them to the interest payments in the federal debt and the other uncontrollables, and it means that 70% of the entire federal budget is made up of items over which the Congress and the administration are supposed to have no control. I wonder how some of you in the private sector would feel if you were told to rescue a sinking business, but only on the condition that you could work with 30% of that business's budget and the other 70% was off limits.
Out of the ICE program last night about Victor Herman?
No.
Well, the movie about Victor Herman, who was an American citizen imprisoned in slave labor camps in Russia. And I hope that the American people, I'm surprised that the Solzhenitsyn book never made it to the screen. And this movie last night had tremendous impact. It had to on anybody who saw it.
You mean the Gula Archipelago, that never made it to the screen?
Of course not.
They did have another one, A Day in the Life of...
Ivan Ivanovich?
Yeah.
Now, this Gulag...
That was a tremendous movie. Made me sick.
I
couldn't eat for days. It was the greatest diet I was ever on. But Solzhenitsyn is a voice in the wilderness. Even right now, he's a voice in the wilderness. But I want to thank
you. There in the canal zone, I remember the officials in the American government were so terrified of provoking violence that they gave away the canal zone with the Panama Canal thrown in. Now, I contrast this with the reaction of the British in the Falkland Islands situation, and I'd like to know your opinion. Now, do you think if the Falkland Islands were in American possession and some other country invaded, do you think we would react as strongly as the British did?
I think it depends on who is in office at the time. I think it's a mistake, Fred, to talk about the British in terms of being a perpetual, having a perpetual policy. The British, being another democratic nation similar to our own, even though they have a parliamentary system, nevertheless, the conduct of their foreign policy depends on who is at number 10 Downing Street, just as the conduct of American foreign policy depends on who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, it seems, though, that the Thatcher government has the pretty much united support of the British people, and I was wondering if this entire nation and government would be the mobs of these anti-war, peaceniks and peaceniks and
yes,
pacifists that would run.
Oh yes, without a doubt, regardless of whether it be this president or the excuse for one we had before him, the fact is there would be all these people who apparently are so bored that they have no excitement, no joy in their life, and so they take to the streets and make like 1917 in Kronstadt. Nevertheless, don't put up with the type of... don't forget that even the British, who are supposed to be very oriented towards freedom of speech, nevertheless, don't put up with the type of carryings-on that we do. Their bobbies do crack heads, make no mistake. Their police are not subject to the type of hamstringing codifications that ours are subject to.
Don't have the ACLU either over there, I'm sure. I mean, the ACLU...
They don't have anything as formidable, as powerful as the ACLU, but they don't have a constitution as we have either. But they do have their bleeding hearts. I ran into many of them when I was in London 2 months ago.
Actually, in what we consider the Anglo-Saxon countries, under great criticism, it seems that Argentina, in this case, whether it's right or wrong, that's another question to be discussed.
Is what right or wrong, Mario?
Excuse me?
Is what right or wrong?
Whether the decision, let's say, of the Argentines to have taken the Falkland Islands is right or wrong, right? It seems that, let's say, to put that aside, to put that decision, that point aside, it seems that when a Latin American country decides to take on its own a political or an economic decision which has, let's say, some bearing on the political affairs of the world, it comes under great criticism. People start sharpening their pencils and saying, oh, well, look at the Argentines. The Argentines, they've got so many Nazis in their countries, and they didn't participate in the Second World War.
Mario,
a lot of other countries did the same.
Mario,
my point
you're overlooking the main source of criticism, which is that they invaded territory that legally was not theirs.
Well, this is something that right now...
How conveniently, Mario, you overlook the fact that Argentina committed an aggressive act.
Well, if we go far back enough, we can say that England, in all of her glory and power, has committed, because she's got today a double-edged morality.
Mario, why don't you just admit that you're an apologist for the Argentines, and in effect what you're saying is whatever they do is okay?
No, I am not saying that at all.
Because they speak the Spanish language?
Argentina or Greece.
Well, that's what you've been doing, Mario. Hey, Mario, come on, be a mensch. Be honest about it.
No. You see, the thing is...
Mario, some people say, I'm a tough guy on the air and all that. And I tell you, I am, when it comes to what you're doing just sends me up a wall. Because you're being blind either intentionally or through a total naive aspect to your outlook. You are not being honest. You're not being forthright and saying, hey, look, I'm for the Argentines, and I don't care, right or wrong, I'm for the Argentines.
No. I am being honest because I am giving you, and I will say it's in a past.
But at least be honest and say...
United States. This will affect the United States. Okay, let's look at it. Okay, my opinion may not be an important one.
It sure is. It's the most important opinion. Hey, wait a minute, Mario. I hate to interrupt again.
I say now, why is it that the United States is willing to give arms to Argentina for them to go and kill each other over there, right? So that they can stop communism. And once Argentina, let's say, decides to use these arms against another country, which is not necessarily its own people...
Mario, your body may be in the United States, but your heart's somewhere south of the border.
Oh, it certainly is. And now with this coming out, with this issue coming out, I can certainly say I've never given my opinion...
South of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when Stars Above came out to play.
Mr. Grant.
And now as my mother. Yes. Mario, next time you call, be more forthcoming, will you, Mario?
Hey, my last thing is today you sing about it and you make fun of it and you make...
I'm making fun of you because you're not being honest, Mario. You're not being honest. And,
well, I am being honest.
If you're being honest, you're being honest only because I forced you to be honest. I shamed you into being honest. I even tricked you into being honest.
I feel no shame whatsoever. That cliche of Hispanic...
Mario, I do have to leave, give somebody else a chance. But as they say in Buenos Aires, Sig Heil. On WMCA, he did two things that I have to commend him for. Number one, he picked up the phone and he called. And number two, he eventually did state an out-and-out opinion. And that leads to number three, which means that you have something specifically to respond to. That's on the plus side. On the negative side, what disturbed me was when he launched that, what I would consider that, can't think of a better word than paranoidal peroration. How do you like that? Sound like Barry Farber, paranoidal pero. Anyway, this paranoia that virtually every ethnic and racial group has, that no matter what the circumstances, they immediately justify their feelings by saying, well, it's just because we're Latins. Well, it's just because we're this. It's just because we're that. And I don't think there's one scintilla of truth in what Mario said. But nevertheless, God bless him, he at least did call. He probably never called again. Right now he's probably calling the WMCA publicity department asking for an 8x10 glossy of me, a photo of me, because he wants to put it on his dartboard. And out there in Jackson Heights, they'll get together, and every night they'll throw darts at it. And then listen to the soccer games on shortwave coming from Asuncion, Paraguay. But he called. He called. Weeks had taken place, and the British fleet was steaming with all deliberate speed, with the accent on the word deliberate. While people like, the assistant managing editor for one of our great newspapers in the tri-state area laughed about it, called it the front page, the mouse that roared story. Nobody took it seriously. Newsweek, Time, everybody laughed about it. Ha-ha. They thought that the British Empire being something that had disintegrated, that it was all over, that the British would just take it. See, there's a mentality that is set in the American media, and I'm not saying that I was immune to it, because I wasn't, but a mentality has set in, and that is, we thought they were going to accept it. We thought they were just going to take it and rationalize and go their merry way. We've come to believe that only Israel responds to acts of aggression. But any Western power, why, we're not supposed to.
Well, we're supposed to be civilized. We're supposed to be careful.
After all, what would Jane Fonda say?
Poor God bless her. When I was over, she was kept away.
Notice now that her beloved Hanoi is in safely tucked in communist hands, she says nothing. In the Mayor's Trophy game, Matt, Yankees, it was all for charity, though, so let's fill Yankee Stadium with New York Met fans tomorrow at 7 when they play the Skunks from the Bronx. I tell you, I smell it all. I smell it all. They're starting to win. They're winning. And Boston's losing. Same old story. You'd think people would get bored, wouldn't you? Why doesn't George Steinbrenner just buy the Boston Red Sox, Detroit Tigers, and the Milwaukee Brewers, and the Baltimore Orioles? He already owns the Toronto Blue Jays and the Cleveland Indians, and the California Angels. He already owns the Seattle Mariners and the Minnesota Twins, his number one. Did you know the Minnesota Twins have been named the New York Yankee number one farm team? I hope Roy Smalley has his back trouble return. I really do. It's all right. He'll still be getting paid because they got that clause there. But anyway, is there a doctor in the house? There's got to be something wrong with a grown man hating a ball team that much. Well, forget about them. Let's go Mets. Okay. Marshal von Steinbrenner. I don't care if you don't like what I say. I don't care. So there. Tell that to Phil Rizzuto, will you? A list of all the places Paul Needlenose Menage is barred from. We wouldn't have time to take any phone calls. Discover. How come the New York State Lottery put them out of business, huh? Plank. But I love it. I wish they'd put me in charge. I don't know whether they let me get on the boat or not, but at least put me in charge. I would like to be the guy who tells everybody else who can get on and who can get off. And I would love to tell John Lindsay, they don't want you.
I would tell him more than that.
Yeah, well, that's right. The Tower of Jelly himself.
And he was the one who started.
It's because
I must say,
hey, wait a minute, Salvatore.
Yes.
Why the phony accent?
No, this is my way.
No, you're adopting the accent. Listen, I don't mind accents, but let's have a legit. Come on.
I have a little...
Come on, what you know, Pat Harrington Jr. already stole that.
No, well, I want to say we should leave all the lawyers behind and all the liberated...
Do you feel more comfortable talking with an accent?
That's the way I'm going to talk.
Just when the going gets, just when it begins to get fun, we have to go. Straight ahead, special edition. Your influence counts. Here's it. For all time's sake, get Gaddafi.
57 WN.
Newcomers really don't notice that, but after you've been here for any length of time, you look around, you realize it's like two different cities. Anyway, on the east side of the mid-40s is the United Nations. And you're well aware that it is different around the United Nations, that you see these diplomats and foreign council cars, they have special license plates, which allows them to park in certain designated areas. But they're not content with the designated areas. They park anywhere and everywhere with impunity. I saw one diplomat's car with 16, count them, 16 parking tickets. But he didn't get, the car didn't get them all the same day, probably 16 days running. They don't get towed, so they don't have to worry. They don't have to pay the ticket. But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked. Well aware of the fact that the so-called United Nations is there, and it occurred to me that calling it the UN, short for United Nations, is ridiculous. They're not united in any way, shape, or form. They never have been, they never will be. But the only time they come close to being united is when they try to lynch Israel, which they do with great frequency. But I would say that the UN should stand for the Ununited Nations. Anyway, the Ununited Nations has gotten a ceasefire talk going again, and the Ununited Nations proves again how meaningless it is. Did you hear that Muammar Gaddafi may be selling the Exocet missiles to Argentina? Speaking of Social Security, one man's opinion, the time is long overdue for our elected representatives and political commentators to stop politicizing the Social Security issue. Evidence documenting the terminal nature of Social Security's illness is overwhelming, and the fact that it is both fiscally and philosophically bankrupt is becoming clearer daily to the average working man and woman. It's safe to say that the ordinary American worker does not fully understand the Social Security program and has been kept deliberately confused and misinformed. If we ever fully understand the magnitude of the fraud in the system, we would demand that the entire system be dismantled. But before we can begin to educate Americans on the truth of Social Security's shortcomings, we must first dispel the myths of the past 40 years. Among a host of popular misconceptions are, number one, that Social Security is retirement insurance. That's myth number one. Myth number two, there is no danger of retirement trust funds running out in the near future. Myth number three, Americans strongly support the Social Security system, as shown by numerous polls, and so forth and so on. Anyway, I've got a lot on my mind. I have a hunch I'm going to filibuster. I don't think I'm going to let anybody else talk. So there. Paul Needle-Nosed Minaj is barred from. We wouldn't help him. He tried to get in disguise the other night. He disguised himself as Louis Giambalvo, but it didn't work. In 8 years in office. Yes. Frank, it's Frank. Folks, it's Frank.
Yes, Bob.
Frank, where have you been?
I'm on a workaholic binge, Bob. I'm thinking of relocating out of New York, so I'm saving my nickels and dimes. Hopefully this summer I'll...
We missed you. This program has sunk to a new low without you, Frank.
Oh, thank you, Bob. Perhaps I could help shore it up.
All right, listen, Frank. As long as you call, I don't want to give you short shrift here. So we're gonna have news right now. Stay right where you are.
Yes, Bob.
And you'll be our first caller after our news update.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Frank is back. People have said, what happened to Frank? I know Gumbada's gone for good, but Frank, hey, come on. Port New York, who had been for some time a resident analyst on the Bob Grant program, but took a bit of a sabbatical, and he's back on our phone. Frank?
Yes, Bob. Bob, the world has stood in awe and wonder. It has trembled with fear and admiration as the noble sons of the Pampas of Argentina have stood up in the face of the world and slapped the British lion. And you know, Bob, I see in the press and in the media in this country a very pro-British Anglo-Saxon propaganda campaign that has been going on against Argentina and its great leader, General Leopoldo Galtieri. And the reason I say that there is a prejudice, it's almost, I hate to use the cliche racist, is because 40% of the population of Argentina have sprung from the tree of Italy. And, you know, they use terms, for example, in the Times today, this lie, they use the term Argentina's land grab of the Malvinas. Well, one of the biggest land grabs in history, and far worse, has been Britain's colonialist occupation of Northern Ireland. Well, Argentina has, it's shown that the United States has made a very serious policy mistake in backing the British. For some reason, the people in power in this country are enchanted with the British. They identify with the Anglo-Saxons. But they've done more to unite. I mean, what about the Monroe Doctrine? Why is it selective that only the Soviet Union cannot come into South America? But as long as the British control the Malvinas, that it's all right? I mean, they say that Argentina is so rabidly anti-Semitic, but yet Argentina is receiving arms from Israel. And in like turn, Argentina had sent arms and aid to Israel during the 1973 war. And I don't know who President Reagan's advisors are, but they've made a horrible and costly mistake. And every time we've heard how Argentina, they call it a third-rate junta, a tin pot dictatorship. Well, no matter what happens, Argentina cannot possibly lose for the simple reason that even if they lost the Malvinas, which they won't, even if they did, they would come out and say, here we are, a so-called third world nation, and we've stood up and more than taken the lumps out of the British by doing this. Why, even the maggot in the Caribbean, Fidel Castro, had offered support for the Argentines.
Right.
And therefore, we've made the mistake that we've alienated people. I mean, Britain has done absolutely nothing for this country. They've dragged us into two wars because of their own appeasement in the second one, and because of their own stupidity in the first one. America wound up on their side. And it's about time that we sit down and look at this rationally and logically, and that's why I think President Reagan sent that note of congratulations to the great Leopoldo Galtieri. You know, San Martin was called the George Washington of Latin America. Well, this son of the tree of Italy, Leopoldo Galtieri, surely has to be the Garibaldi of Latin America. And a lot of people don't realize that in the Malvinas, the people never had full British citizenship. The food, everything came from Argentina. And Britain just saw this as a chance to try and humiliate a smallly populated nation and try and shore up Margaret Thatcher's government.
But I let you go on at length because I felt that we needed some pro-Argentine comments due to the fact we've had 99%.
To hear that, but...
Hello? You know what? I disconnected. I didn't do it right. I thought I was Vladimir Horowitz playing the Rachmaninoff Concerto. And I gave a... And anyway, sorry. If I hung up on you on the Long Island line, and that was the first Long Island call we had since 1974, I muffed it. All right, that's... By the way, let me tell you, when you call, you're not talking to some guy in a remote studio on the West Coast. You're talking to a guy right here, smack dab in the heart of the tri-state area. For better or for worse, it's me, Bob Grant, at your service. Hello?
Important plane in JFK, they still won't let it go because Argentina needs these weapons very badly. And I just think that each day that goes by, Reagan makes Carter look better and better and better. And you're talking to somebody who supported Reagan very much. Both in 76, man is totally, I'm sorry to say this, but a clown.
Well,
in every way.
I don't agree with that at all. As a matter of fact, he'd have to do a lot more to make Carter look better. He could never make Carter look better. Nothing could ever make Carter look better.
Well, maybe you're right, but he is looking now. 2 nights ago, I just said, what's going on there? Maybe it's Raymond Donovan. I don't know. He has nothing better to do, so he's sending messages now.
Who?
Raymond Donovan.
Well, Raymond Donovan ought to get out of the cabinet. Why doesn't he have the decency to resign, for heaven's sake? You know, I don't know what these guys, they have... You talk about couillons. My gosh.
Well,
if it were me, I'd say, hey, look, Mr. President, I'm embarrassing you. I'm going to step down. What does he want with that cockamamie job anyway? He took a pay cut, for heaven's sake.
Who's next, Bob? First we had Allen, Donovan, then the Attorney General Lynch, I believe, is also under some...
Yeah, but But you know what? It doesn't make any difference who's in. Human beings go into Washington. And we keep expecting because we elected a new person, we're going to get a bunch of saints. We're never going to get a bunch of saints. Because the people that go to Washington are no better, no worse.
Like you and I.
Right.
Absolutely.
But I'm not so sure about you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.
If the Yanks lose, they always wanted one New York team to win. I just wanted to know, like, why you have a certain dislike for the Yankees. This is my first...
Oh, I don't dislike the Yankees. I hate the Yankees. I hate them. I despise them. For one very simple reason. They've won too doggone many pennants and too many World Series. Give somebody else a chance.
Well,
Let the Yankees rest for about 100 years. You know, and then let them come back and participate.
There's going to be one. But I think permissiveness among all segments of society. I see rich people. You know, teenagers in wealthy suburbs, smoking pot. You see million-dollar homes, and then you go into...
I don't have a hang-up about rich people. I'm not jealous. If they're rich, that's fine. Great.
No,
But you seem to have a hang-up about rich people.
No, permissiveness among the rich, that the poor are...
Where are you coming from? There's something wrong with you.
What?
Really, I don't know. You're showing me there's something wrong. You know, the permissiveness among the rich people. The poor people aren't permissive?
No, I mean, but there's also decadence among the rich. You should...
Uh-huh.
People...
What have you been reading? Karl Marx lately? What have you been reading?
No, I'm not...
It's a typical Memorial Day weekend. Overcast. And all the schlubs who are listening right now, you're ensconced in your automobile, you're thrilled with the Met victory. Wisconsin automobiles. I don't know where the heck you were all going or where you were coming from now. Was it worth it? Does it make sense? What is this madness? I know some cajones. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but cajon is the word. Well, see, I'm going to go to the shore. What are they going to do when they get there? What is it? Well, anyway, it just may be that this has been a letdown for a lot of you this Memorial Day weekend. I mean, it's the same old thing. Why don't they show the same 500 Indianapolis race that they had 25 years ago? Just keep showing the same one, right? I can't get excited over it. The only thing that really, I think, was newsworthy and important and positive was that nobody died. I saw the motion picture Rocky III. And I must say, it was well edited, well directed. Stallone is a talented, likable fellow. That the sound effects, the editing, indeed the acting, the makeup man, everything, made sure that front and center throughout that motion picture was violence. Violence. Violence on two counts. Number one, either A, they were in the ring beating each other's brains out, and to you young fellows, let me say that if punches were thrown the way they are in that motion picture, the recipients of those punches would not survive. And if they did, they would be walking vegetables. Can vegetables walk? Well, staggering vegetables. And the other level of violence in the motion picture was they were preparing for it. Throughout the entire... Well, I know it's about a boxer, and I know it's about fighting. But the intensity of the audience is what I noticed. Everybody riveted. And I looked at a group of allegedly 20th century civilized Americans, and I said, yeah, if it weren't for this element of combative joy, the capacity for combative joy that we have, we would not have survived and prevailed on this sphere, without a doubt. Perhaps with the B.F. Skinner's admitting that behavioral science has grave limitations, as I predicted 12, 15 years ago, that maybe we'll have to turn one day to the surgeons, as Dr. Robert Jastrow suggests, and monkey around with the hypothalamus Oh, and I could see some of the bleeding hearts who inadvertently happened to have their station trip to 57 on the AM dial and are subjected to this ranting right-winger. I could hear those bleeding hearts say, why, he sounds like Aldous Huxley, or is it George Orwell, or is it... No, it's Bob Grant. And
Hollywood Memorial Cemetery.
what are you going to do, visit a bunch of graves?
Yeah, I'm a kind of a grave robber. I even do that around here.
Hey, do you know that Bombada from Yonkers has photographed graves of some of the most famous people? Can you imagine? What is his fascination with a guy's grave?
Yeah, but Bombada from Yonkers is that kind of a guy, I feel.
Uh-huh.
You know, that's big stuff.
Okay.
I'm going to follow it.
The mail that I get, because, quite frankly, the phone calls have been very unresponsive in this. I can only guess. You know, it's an interesting thing. In school nowadays, students are graded on written composition and oral composition. Our teacher, on written composition, you'd all be getting some pretty good grades, but oral composition is virtually lacking. I don't understand it, but, and again, there's a lot I don't understand, I suppose, but I go through the mail and I see all these worries and all these interesting, really interesting observations, and I say, how come these same people aren't calling? If, believe me, if we were getting the phone calls equal to the letters, it'd really be something. Perhaps people are less intimidated. I don't know. Well, no, wait a minute. Oh, calling in a radio station is not news. Maybe that's it. Maybe.
Disco music. None at all. Wait, be quiet, be quiet.
All right, on WMCA, this...
They have the audacity and the colossal, I forget what the word is that they...
Here. Legal aliens?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And they had elections that they conducted the other day. I saw on the media, on the television in Queens.
You're talking about Colombia, the elections in Colombia, where these cavones, these boorish lowlifes got up in Jackson Heights at 7 in the morning,
right,
and started celebrating the election, much to the dismay and disturbance and demoralization of their neighbors.
right.
To let you know that when you're referring to those maps about Argentina, you said calligrapher and you meant cartographer.
That's right. Did you notice a slight pause? Because I sensed that I sensed that I had said something wrong,
Right.
and then I wasn't quite sure.
Right. Well, that's it.
Okay, spell the word.
Yes.
Cartographer, yes, C-A-R-T.
O-G-R-A-P-H-E-R.
Right, okay, that's cartographer, and that's what I should have said. I stand or sit corrected. Since I'm sitting, I sit corrected. However, give the definition of the word that I used wrongly. Calligrapher.
Oh, okay, well, any form of writing. Calligrapher is one who writes, one who studies writing and handles all forms.
Right, every now and then, just when I begin to think that this time on the air is bereft of anybody with any kind of intellect, along comes someone like yourself to restore my confidence. I really...
You very often, very seldom rather, make an error, and it's interesting to hear you make one.
Well, even in me, I know, I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. So what country they come from, in this particular case, it's Colombia. And they say that Jackson Heights has become wall-to-wall Colombian, Argentinian. Not to be pejorative about the countries from which they came, what do you think about the fact that these people were all excited over an election back in Colombia? If they really cared, listen closely. I want you to think about this. I don't want a knee-jerk response. If they really cared, wouldn't they have stayed there? And since they have left the country and presumably adopted the United States as their country, what difference does it make to them? I ask the question in all sincerity. At least First mistake, you haven't really heard me all these years. If a person has a different point of view and they express it, even when I was unleashed, even when there was absolutely no censorship of me whatsoever, I never called a person stupid simply because their opinion differed. By the way, Kenny, you're very disloyal.
Why?
Why? You called me. I'm driving home. I'm listening to another station. I hear you calling that guy that some nights he uses 2 names, some nights 3 names.
Who are you talking about? Refresh my memory. Which guy?
Which guy?
You told me I called somebody else. Who did I call?
Yeah, you called somebody else.
On AM station?
Yeah. The guy's about 55, but he still is junior.
Oh, Art Rusk.
If I wanted to say the name, I would have, you dumbo.
Oh, okay, so what?
So what? So I thought you were a loyal WMCA guy all the way. And then you go and ask him the same question you asked me. I nearly drove off the road. I said, this guy, he asks me a question. A couple hours later, he's calling, he's asking somebody else.
Yeah, because he goes to email baseball. Can you go back to 1930s? 1940s?
No, I'm too young, Kenny, too young.
I know, you're not that young. Okay.
I can't win with this guy. I can't win with you, Kenny. What'd you call about today?
I'm having a little problem. I'm talking about 2 different things. I'm being harassed.
By whom?
Imagine, Kenny, by these little darlings, these little minority kids. They're throwing bottles and rocks towards my window.
Where do you live? What borough?
In Flatbush, Brooklyn.
You're still in far from Ebbetsfield?
Where I live now? Or where I used to live?
Where you used to live. What's wrong with this guy? This guy's taking slow pills.
I never lived near Ebbetsfield.
Huh?
I never lived near Ebbetsfield.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I was going to talk about that, and I was going to talk about this...
Talk about anything you want.
And about that terror gang that hasn't been brought up. That goes 50 miles into Nassau County and goes into homes and commits sex acts on guys' wives and makes them watch and goes into restaurants. But I'll get to that in a moment.
All right. First, this word from our sponsor. Yeah, what, Kenny?
These kids, these little darlings, they go into the yard, they climb over. I live in the courtyard in Flatbush. And they go around. They tell them to stay out of there. I mean, they've gone into... That's when I see a window open. They're going to the window around the house. So I tell them to stay out. Since after that, and there was another incident, they start to throw, I see, rocks and bottles. Con Edison was fixing the street. They left these big rocks. They picked up these rocks and they're throwing from an angle. So they're throwing at me. I know that they're throwing because I yelled at them there. And in fact, a few years ago, which is starting now, around July 4th, they started throwing firecrackers. They're starting now already to firecrack. And these big blockbusters. They're throwing the yard. It didn't bother me. I could walk the house. I got a dog, and the dog was going crazy, running up and back. So I hollered them. I said, if they're throwing these cherry bombs, as the next one gets thrown, I'm going to shoot right at your window. They ran. They got scared. They thought, I faked it with a wrench. And the cops came, and I told them that I said, well, they throwing these firecrackers. I couldn't stand it. I just scared them. They said, well, you can't do nothing. They had the cops watch.
Why don't you get a machine gun, Kenny?
Listen, you talked about killing the guy. If you kill the guy, you can't touch these kids. And if you do anything to these guys, you'll be over with these animals. So the only way you do anything, you bump them off, you got to hide the body or something there. Because I wouldn't go back with these animals there.
Well, how would they know it was you, Ken? How would anybody know it was you?
If they got the evidence, if they had somebody point out that I did it, have to be if you got rid of these people, you have to do it when nobody's around.
Yeah.
But I want to get to what do you think about these guys? About they're talking now that they caught these so-called.
I think they're underprivileged. These guys are obviously underprivileged.
Yeah, they're doing.
Have led disadvantaged. These guys have led disadvantaged lives. And they've been victimized. They're victims of all kinds of discrimination. And, my heart goes out to them. I'm with the ACLU. You can't beat them, join them.
Don't be surprised now. You're visually, he has to fix it. What do you do? They said kill him. Don't be surprised if the lynching in this city or the
Hey, listen, I'm being
facetious. I'm being facetious, Kenny, but you look up their records, you'll find that they had served notice on society years and years ago, that they hated society, that they were enemies of society, and society has not seen fit to lock them up for good. Yet.
You know, because it's gone back to 60s civil rights. It's allowed with your rights.
Hey, Kenny, I got to step aside, Kenny, and so do I think that people would be so outraged that they would demand some action. And yet I think society, instead of being outraged, has gotten just worn down. Thugs go into schools and in front of the entire class commit robbery. What happened out there on Long Island, I think, is only the beginning of a new trend. We are on the side of the British, and I deplore the fact that we are providing the British with Sidewinder missiles.
So am I.
There was a lot of emotionalism. I had my colleague, Mr. Farber, on the program one afternoon, and he went into a long Teddy Roosevelt-type talk about how when a dictatorship and a democracy are fighting, we, of course, will be on the side of the democracy. I think that is a simplistic statement that does not take into consideration the very fragile relationship we're trying to build, or we're trying to build, in South and Central America. Don't all call at once. Hello. Well, with all due respect to the previous caller, nice man, but extremely naive. What he was saying about the interest rates shows that man really...
He doesn't think too clearly.
No, he doesn't, but so, you know, that's no crime.
Right. There are over 500,000 Jews living in Argentina, and many of them have disputed the claims that Timmerman has made.
You know, if the Argentine regime was that bad, Timmerman never would have gotten out.
Exactly, Bob. The lack of human rights in Northern Ireland, too, if he wanted to, if he wants to get into that, because certainly Amnesty International, the Human Rights Court in Europe, have all found Britain guilty of torture and of atrocious crimes in Northern Ireland. But that isn't really what I want to talk about.
Well, I don't know if they found them guilty of atrocious. You know, people always go in for verbal overkill on this program.
Well, they have, if you want to. But the points I wanted to cover really are, I am more concerned, and I wish this previous caller would...
You know, Bobby Sands croaked because he wanted to, not because anybody made him croak.
Well, they're administered by Britain. They're owned, in fact, by the Falklands Island Company and 23 landlords who live in Britain and have...
You called about this before, and I told you the same thing then that I'm thinking right now. I thank you, sir. This is to amaze me, is how people have to make everything either all black or all white. Either Britain is all merciless and cruel, or Argentina is, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. Did not want to see Golden Pond on Golden Pond.
I didn't see that.
But some to separate a person's artistic work from their political idiocy.
Right.
Now, she's a political moron.
Yeah.
But she's a...
That's a disgusting picture. I'm not a blue nose, but when I saw her in the bathroom, sitting down and doing...
well, that's
so
not...
disgusting.
Well, I don't know. I
That's
saw her... Yes, sir. On WMCA. So they showed her in the bathroom. You know, I forgot to ask what movie they showed her in the bathroom. What's she doing? Shaving? Travesty. I think it's a absolute disgrace to James Brady. I think it's absurd that they would waste all that time looking at a motion picture, Taxi Driver, listening to testimony from Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster had nothing to do with the doggone crime.
I know.
It's all irrelevant. Speaking of
Understand that for every word I use, he used 6,428. And for the 12,292,000 words that he used, sitting in for me for 4 days last week, Barry, wherever you are, I thank you. Where does he get his energy? Oh, please, do I wish some of that would rub off on me. I mean, he is like shot out of a cannon at all times. I must talk to Mrs. Farber, not the Mrs. Farber, but his mother. I must find out how she did it. He was not born 52 years ago. He was launched.
This one is the statement made by Caspar Weinberger on Saturday that American foreign policy is not made in the streets. He was referring to the anti-nuclear rally. And the second statement was by Ronald Reagan, who said that we could win a limited nuclear war. What do you think about those three statements?
As far as the first statement is concerned, I couldn't agree more. I didn't vote for a bunch of people in the streets. I voted for a senator. I voted for a congressman. I voted for a president. And that's what representative government is all about. A huge get-together last Saturday when, because a lot of people didn't have much to do, they got together in Central Park in a meaningless outing, which in a week or two I don't think will really amount to much. I know in saying that some people are going to say, "Well, that warmonger, he likes war. He lusts for war." Absolutely not. Absolutely not. History is a very brutal teacher. History is a very stern taskmaster. And history shows that the only time we're doomed to war is when we're not prepared for war. Make no mistake, if you want to be an idealistic sophomore, then you would believe that to have peace in your heart and to throw down your arms and to look at the Attila the Huns of the 1980s and say, "We mean only well, brother. See, we are not armed. Look. We don't want to hurt you, so we know you won't hurt us." That is the surest way to invite our destruction. And I want to say more about this in terms of what the communist techniques have been for manipulating so-called peace movements. The fact of the matter is that Santa Anna said it all. People love to quote him, but they don't really pay attention to what they're saying. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And you'd think by this time we would have learned that when it comes to the bully boys of the world, like the Leonid Brezhnevs, you don't negotiate from weakness, you negotiate only from strength. Don't want to learn that. Hey, let's call the Department of Immigration and Naturalization and find out why Dr. Helen Caldicott is in this country. I want to know why she left Australia to come here to participate and to be one of the leaders, one of the major leaders. As a matter of fact, she's president of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, a group opposed to nuclear arms. Why she is so active in this movement. I have interviewed her on the phone, on the long-distance line, and I found everything she said to be most specious and most suspicious as well.
It's mostly communist rhetoric.
Well, a lot of these people mouth the communist rhetoric and don't know it.
Oh, no.
And then there are those who do know it. I want to know whether Caldicott knows it or doesn't know it.
I'll tell you, though, the thing that...
Because I don't think actress Sally Field and I don't think comedian Lily Tomlin know that they're mouthing the rhetoric. They're unsophisticated. But I suspect that people like Dr. Caldicott know full well what they're up to.
Well,
and I think that Rupert Murdoch should do us a favor and let us know what there is to know about Helen Caldicott. And if somebody from the New York Post is listening, would you please do that? Dr. Helen Caldicott, who left Australia and seemed to, from the very moment she touched down, was in the vanguard of this unilateral disarmament movement. Rupert, can you hear me?
Bob?
Yes?
This is Marty from Roselle Park. There was a peace demonstration in Moscow Saturday. It was in the Star Ledger Sunday, and then it was confirmed on the radio just now. There were 10 members there compared to 750,000. There were 11 members. 10 were there. They were surrounded by the police, taken to the station, and told to stop it. The only thing they're allowed to do is do what the official Soviet Peace Committee tells them. Today, the flash came in that the 11th was arrested. There's quite a difference in numbers, isn't it? About the front 1912 organization. Their address was on West 4th Street. You just look at that, you can almost read between the lines.
Well, Marty, you seem to be pretty astute in this area. See if any of these names are familiar to you from another era. Ruth Messenger, George Wald,
yes.
Marge Piercy, Seymour Melman, and here's one for you. Here's the grabber to end all grabbers, Dave Dellinger.
Yes, Dave Dellinger was featured in this thing, according to the paper, and let me say this. I've been told, now I can't prove this, that I was told, and I can't give you my source, that the federal government knows that David Dellinger and another one, a woman, were getting money from North Vietnam to foster peace movements. It was laundered through so many French banks.
Well, Dellinger has visited Hanoi and made no bones about where he stood in that war. He was pro-Hanoi without any question. I want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, that one of the major contributors from a propaganda standpoint is an organization that has put out something called the New York Mobilizer. And the goals are zero nuclear weapons, ban nuclear power, not just nuclear bombs, but all nuclear power, stop the arms race, meet human needs, and not one thing is directed against the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, here's a letter. Dear Mr. Grant, unfortunately, I seldom get the opportunity to listen to your program. But on June 3rd, I heard you discuss nuclear disarmament. James Taylor, whose new song might be titled Capitulation Fever, Jane Fonda, whose husband Tom Hayden Fonda, who will be a member of the California State Assembly later this year, Dr. Helen Caldicott, whom I predict will someday have a soda named after her, but only if we don't get blown to smithereens at all. The night before, Dr. Caldicott, the person, not the soft drink, appeared on the Merv show with two other well-known experts on matters scientific and political, Sally Field and Lily Tomlin. When it became evident that they were there to discuss nuclear disarmament, I turned the channel because it seemed like the thing to do. An impulse I would later regret. However, I did turn back in time to hear the final few minutes. The general tone of the conversation was that the U.S. and USSR were more or less co-equal villains. The emphasis was on our own politicians, but the consensus seemed to be that we could somehow get the message to the Russian people and should write to the Soviet embassy. When confronted with the question of how will the Russian people get the message, Dr. Caldicott gives me gas, but at least it's not radiation, deftly equated the ensuing massive NYC rally with the Russian peace movement consisting of 11 activists and Leonid Brezhnev's doctor, who once spoke on television. Dr. Caldicott was vague about the nature of her colleague's address, and probably for good reason. For once, Lily Tomlin had to settle for being the second funniest person on stage. By the time the rally was taking place in Central Park, the U.S. had been downgraded to the sole villain by the speakers, and the number of Russian anti-nuclear activists, the Dr. Caldicott Brigade, was reduced from a number you could count on your fingers and 2 toes to a number you could count on your earlobes, as 10 were arrested, leaving 1 committee member and 1 doctor, if he can get away from the TV studio, to cavort in Pushkin Square. Many people seem to think that even though demonstrations are not allowed and the flow of information is tightly controlled in the USSR, the message will somehow get through to the Russian people. And once it does, the Russian people will do what they always do, vote the bum out of office and set things straight, like they did with Stalin and the rest. A couple of months ago, Meryl Streep founded Performing Artists for Nuclear Disarmament. A short time later, 2 members, Jules Pfeiffer and Jill Clayburgh, appeared on one of the myriad of 5 o'clock news shows. Mr. Pfeiffer's main contribution was, quote, "If the Russians are so bad, how come they haven't bombed us yet?" while Mrs. Clayburgh was somewhat more reflective. When asked if she considered the Soviet Union to be a threat, she paused before answering, doubtlessly sorting out the facts stored in that repository of political wisdom inherent in the minds of seemingly all famous young actresses, finally responding, "That's not the question," and quickly informed us of the harmful nature of nuclear weapons, which is always good to know. With all the great young actresses out stumping for nuclear disarmament, who's left to play Nora in the next production of A Doll's House? Well, there is someone. A person being pushed out of a field, becoming quickly top-heavy with instant experts. Dr. Edward Teller. The least he could do is tour the country with a lecture on the Stanislavski method. But who would take him seriously? The real nature of this anti-nuclear movement is the rebirth of leftist radicalism in this country. The emotional issue, who could be against nuclear destruction, attracts followers and attention. Next, the various anti-American socialist issues are tied in. The rally was decidedly anti-Reagan, with the Soviets getting off scot-free as if they are just innocent bystanders. It's no accident that the rallies in Western Europe, as well as this one, are directed solely at the United States. Please note the enclosed literature collected prior to the rally. The sponsors listed in the call to the June 12th rally and the New York Mobilizer are rife with Marxist and Communist Front organizations and the Communist Party USA itself. The radicals are manipulating the well-meaning but naive American public. I prefer to remain anonymous, but I hope you can use some of the enclosed material on your program. As I type this letter, Poland is observing her 6th-month anniversary of martial law. Yours very truly, and since the gentleman requests anonymity, I will not read his name, although I would dearly love to, because his letter is absolutely brilliant. I'm sure, Marty, you meant 135 West 4th Street.
Yeah, sure.
That, I'm sure, is the address you're talking about. And what is published there is this organ that says, there will be an intensive Marxist summer session, weekdays, 5 hours daily, July 12th to 22nd in New York City. Learn about how capitalism works, the development of U.S. capitalism in the U.S. working class, history of the 20th century revolutions with activists from around the country. No prior study of Marxism is necessary, and the atmosphere is open and non-dogmatic. Well, that's a lie. It can't possibly be non-dogmatic if they're teaching Marxism, because anybody who knows anything about Marxism knows that Marxism is, by its very nature, dogmatic.
One of the other talk show station was crying with the demonstrators Saturday. The gentleman was British, and he used the expression, all he wants is peace in our time. Now, you and I would recoil at that. And he gave his age. He was born in 1935. So I called him up.
Was he born in South Africa?
What's that?
Was he born in South Africa?
I don't know. He's British. I want me to give his name?
No, I don't want his name, but does he sound as though he has all the answers in the universe?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So I called him up and I said, you were 4 years of age in 1939. And I recall Neville Chamberlain using that very expression, peace in our time, and 30 million people died as a result of that. And he got very, very angry. Told me to send anything I want to the FBI or anything. He got sarcastic. But it shows the mentality, peace in our time. This appeasement, this constant appeasement that swept these. A lot of them are doing it deliberately, as you said, to weaken us, and a lot of them are just dragged in.
Yeah.
They're not realized.
Would that same individual have the same last name as our 7th president?
Yes.
Oh.
From Tennessee.
Yeah.
Hermitage, yes.
Uh-huh. Well, I know the gentleman, having worked with him, and he's part and parcel of the whole liberal panoply of people who have been reciting the same litany for a couple of decades now.
One on Sunday nights at midnight, too.
Thank you very much, Marty. It never fails. It never fails. There was a consultant one day who said, this is all hypothetical, of course. This is all hypothetical. Shall I, let's see, paraphrase the dialogue. Consultant. What you should do is suggest topics. Worn out, broken down radio host. Well, I like to let people talk about what's really on their mind. Consultant. No, you should direct them. Tell them what you want them to talk about. And it never seems to fail. Every time I do, if I say talk about zilch, they talk about zelch. Anyway, people want to talk about what they want to talk about. And in line, you just joined us. Minister is delivering the House of Commons, and we're ready for that right now. So without further ado, let's hear it.
Successful attacks last night. General Moore decided to press forward. The Argentinians retreated. Our forces reached the outskirts of Fort Stanley. Large numbers of Argentine soldiers threw down their weapons. They are reported to be flying white flags over Fort Stanley. Our troops have been ordered not to fire except in self-defense. Talks are now in progress between General Menendez and our Deputy Commander, Brigadier Waters, about the surrender of the Argentine forces on East and West Falklands.
Here. Well, a backbencher. And so, I feel as though suddenly I should be wearing my tweeds. Here. If I were to go to Parliament, I would be one of the most distinguished backbenchers. Here. Yes, of course. She's absolutely right. Oh, she's a member of the opposite party. Oh, the bird Dellingers have crawled out again. After they're like in training. You see, they trained for the Vietnam War, and they won that. And then they got quiet for a while, and they said, well, now what other wars are there to fight? And they said, wait a minute, the big one, the biggest one of all, disarm America. This is it. This is the final push. And you can bet who's behind it. Published 4 times a year by the New York Mobilization for Survival. A newsletter collective. And these names are not household names, the people who put the paper together. But certainly their panoply of ball carriers are no strangers at all. The very people who crippled our effort in Vietnam are the people who are involved not only in this movement to disarm America, but also still trying desperately to let the red flag fly over El Salvador so that it can join the Nicaraguan and Cuban flags in this hemisphere. Here are some of their advertisements. No U.S. intervention in El Salvador. Committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador. That's 19 West 21st Street. I challenge those people at 19 West 21st Street to prove that they have any contact with the people of El Salvador, the real people of El Salvador. Here's another one. The U.S. Peace Council. These are all these front groups, my friends. Stop the arms race. Fund human needs, not the Pentagon. Hands off El Salvador and Central America, Southern Africa, the Middle East. How come they never say hands off to the Soviet Union? How come I never see these same people scrawl hands off Afghanistan, for example? Huh? Hands off Poland. Hands off Hungary. How come? One would think that they were stooges of Moscow, wouldn't one? Listen, that lady in the harbor that I spoke about at the beginning of the broadcast, her arm's getting tired. Her arm's getting tired holding that torch. A lot of times she feels that the people don't really care. I hope this isn't going to be one of those times. I hope this isn't going to be the time that she thinks not enough people care anymore.
Might be interested in listening to an excerpt from an interview that Helen Caldicott gave to Pravda. You know what Pravda is?
Yeah.
Soviet Party newspaper. On December 1st. Would you like to listen to a tiny bit of it? Helen Caldicott, Pravda, December 1. The USA has now accumulated an awesome quantity of nuclear bombs, but the Pentagon continues their production. Our politicians have long ago turned into obedient puppets of the military-industrial complex. The noisy jabber about the, quote, Soviet threat, unquote, begins every time the Pentagon adopts a new system of mass annihilation into its arsenal. 2 more sentences and that's it. We have received a telegram from President Brezhnev in reply to our appeal to end the arms race. Soviet positions immediately supported our movement. End of quotation. According to Izvestia, July 30th, 1980, Dr. Caldicott visited Moscow as a member of the U.S. Peace Council.
The U.S. Peace Council?
Yes.
She's not even an American citizen. What is she doing representing this country? I mean, not that I recognize...
Ask her.
The U.S. Peace Council, because I don't. It's just a stooge group for the Soviet Union.
I was told not to say that. Your guy told me not to mention this, but since you mentioned it yourself,
You were told not to say what?
I was told by the guy who took my call that I shouldn't mention that she had been, in this article, that it was mentioned that she was affiliated with the U.S. Peace Council because there doesn't exist any documentation to prove that the World Peace Council is a transparent Soviet front.
Well, what is it?
Well,
I mean, you know, if it's American, what is she doing representing it? I don't understand.
I don't know, Bob, but all I know is that in all of the articles that I have read in the mainstream press, this stuff was reprinted in the conservative journal. In all of the stuff that I have read about Dr. Caldicott in the mainstream press, there is no mention made.
Well, I tell you what, I've been around a little bit, and I'm just fed up with these people who claim to be such great liberals, but who are there's no relationship between so-called liberalism and tolerance. I interviewed this person months ago on Special Edition, or helped to interview her along with a very distinguished assistant news editor. And I asked her some pretty tough questions, but they were fair. I mean, they were questions that were necessary, that any self-respecting newsman would have to ask. And, you know, she came unglued and complained and complained. Who is that person? See, this type of individual claims they are for peace, claims they are for freedom, but they don't want anybody else to be free to ask them open, honest, real questions.
And then she has the gall to go on these television shows and say that she appreciates the freedom of speech that we enjoy here.
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm a funny guy. When I have in our own midst someone that I believe is disseminating destructive information, someone that is going totally unchallenged, I feel that somebody's got to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute here, what's going on?
But tell me something, Bob. Why is it that in all of the articles about her that you read in the Times and the news and wherever, they do not mention her political affiliations?
Maybe they were taken in by the fact that her approach at first was, well, I'm a doctor, and as a doctor, I'm interested in what happens to people when nuclear bombs are exchanged. And if she wanted to leave it on that basis alone, on what the physiological and even psychological reactions to nuclear holocaust would be, I would have no objection.
Oh, but certainly the reporters of the New York Times are aware of the fact that she gives highly interviews to Pravda.
Yeah, listen, I can't continue to answer these questions. I can speculate along with you. They either just don't care at this point. I would have to think they don't care at this point because they're not stupid.
Yeah, it just depresses me that people are allowed to spread this poison around and not be answered in the forum of public opinion.
Well, you know, when you go to a baseball game, they give you a scorecard so that you know who the players are and what their position is. And I want to know who the players are in this thing.
Yes, I want to know what the teams are.
Yeah. And I want to know what their game is. It's not baseball. Thank you, dear.
Sounds like here we go again with the demonstrations of the 60s, the lefties, and all that.
Well, they've just tooled up. They've just begun. They're ready for whatever round this is. They're ready.
Yes, I feel that you're wrong about your biased opinion about Israel. I think that just because one person was killed in London, there is no excuse for them to go in with their sophisticated weapons and kill thousands of people with bullets and bombs and tanks just because one person was killed. I don't think that there's any... Just because they have tanks and bombs and American money, and they, I feel, took advantage of the Lebanese people. This is no excuse to murder them.
Well, I don't consider it murder. If you're fighting the PLO, you're fighting the PLO and the PLO is shooting at you and you're shooting back.
For civilians.
You're using a self-serving word when you use... Hey, you know what? We just ran out of time. But I thank you just the same, madam. At your service, your humble servant.
Not humble. I think you're not telling the truth.
All right, listen, both of us need a little adenoidal work here.
Partial.
All right, you want to do the sign-off?
But there is no...
I'll say the top of the hour to you if you say the top of the hour to me. Tell me if you know the name of the Metro Park train station. I know what it is, and I think it's an outrage. But apparently the good citizens of New Jersey either A, don't know, or in all likelihood, more pathetically, don't care.
Harrison A. Williams.
That's right. Harrison A. Williams is the name on the Metro Park Center train station, and I think it's a travesty that it remains.
I discovered it in November when I was taking a trip, and I said, how did we ever get that? But that one was snuck under too, I guess.
Here's a convicted felon, a man who had to resign from the Senate in utter disgrace, a man who, for all his 24 years in the Senate, in the Congress, has been convicted of great deceit, and yet his name remains. And no one comes out and says, hey, his name doesn't deserve to grace the...
I believe...
Let's start with Harrison J. Williams and rename the Metro Park.
I'm still down for that.
And I don't like the name of the arena in the Meadowlands. Every time I drive past and see the 2-foot-high block letters or 3-foot-high block letters, I become very annoyed.
One comment about, there's a guy that's always calling you, and he called yesterday, and I figured it's about time I called and let him, told about my group about this call. He's always calling, and he's always knocking Ronald Reagan for this and that, and yesterday it just was like, every other sentence, every other word came out of his mouth was like, wow, I'm quite sure you remember the call yesterday.
Yes, he delights in mispronouncing the president's name.
He says Reagan.
He says Reagan.
Oh, no, excuse me, yes, right, yeah, Reagan, right. Just...
Maybe not as much, but I think that the David Dellingers are, they've come out from under the rocks.
Yeah, exactly.
And, they're stirring. They got to have a new anti-American issue.
No, exactly. That's the kind of thing that I've noticed about people. And
crime, about 4 cases that have a common denominator. The latest one is an animal by the name of Delano Taylor. On probation for shooting 6 people. The judge says William Booth sentenced Taylor 5 years probation. He came out and killed a man almost immediately.
Yeah.
It was Bruce. And we know about Judge Kenneth Brown and his leniency. And now another judge, whose name escapes me, freed a boy, I say a 16-year-old who sodomized an 8-year-old kid. Put him on probation. This is the man's second time on sodomizing kids, also on probation. Now the common denominator is that all 4 judges, I don't want to sound like a racist, but I'm telling it like it is, they were all black. Is it that black judges are more lenient toward criminals?
And ask if there are 4 different individuals, and all 4 let vicious antisocial mutations off with no sentence or an extremely light sentence, then you say, well, what is there about these 4 judges that they may have in common causing them to commit this outrage against society? And you have found that all 4 of them happen to be black. Notice how euphemistically I put it. I say happen to be. Somehow or other, if you say happen to be, that softens it, because it's an extremely sensitive topic, and I appreciate the fact that you presented it in a most sensitive manner. Thank you. Now, I heard a lot of very naive, cliche mouthers. You know, some callers who will call any host, whether it's someone rather volatile and bombastic, like I don't know who, or someone very laid back, non-controversial, and totally without opinions. They just are compelled. They have to call a call-in program. They just have to. It's just like some dogs have to do something on every tree they pass. They can't. It's just they have to leave their mark, something. I think the analogy is very appropriate. And every now and then, when my colleague, that most unique of all broadcasters, Barry, I'm from North Carolina, and don't shut my mouth, Farber, sits in, he seems to flush out a lot of these callers. He gets callers I will never get, probably because they're afraid of me and they're not of him. And he had a panoply of callers. He's filling in for Barry Gray, in case you're wondering. He had a panoply of callers. That's a fancy word for an array of back-to-back, back-to-back, back-to-back callers, all with the same naive notion. And somehow or other, all you have to do is uninvent the bomb. You cannot disinvent the bomb. It's there. It's been invented. You can't pretend that Alamogordo didn't happen. You can't pretend that Hiroshima didn't happen. You can't pretend that Nagasaki didn't happen. You cannot erase what has been done. Those of you who somehow or other think that you can disinvent the bomb are making a tragic mistake. Unless we have mutually verifiable and open inspections, any kind of agreement, in my opinion, is meaningless. Meaningless. I wanted to share that with you. You make it easy for me to unburden myself of a lot of my views and a lot of my comments, because you're very considerate. Unlike days of yore, you don't bombard me with calls. You call, but very selectively. She's going to be a boy. As a matter of fact, Lady Diana called me. Princess Diana called me a few weeks ago and says, you predict babies. You're so good. I heard all about it from your fans. What did you tell me? And I said, it's a boy. So, she is sending me a mug from the King Canute Saloon in Highgate. Anyway, so tis a boy, a very palpable boy. By Jove. Did you see that, according to one, there's so much cockamamie stuff in the papers, you don't know what's legit and what's not. I'm not just talking about page 6, where if a guy coughs and looks the other way, they put it in. No?
Court decision today with the people from...
You mean on the illegal aliens?
Exactly, right.
It is a disaster. It is...
You believe that they would do something like that?
Well, it just proves that no matter how the court changes, in so many ways it still remains the same. I laud the 4 justices who voted against the majority.
Exactly.
I think the majority better learn something about the country. I fail to see where it's fair to American citizens to impose on them the burden of educating the offspring of these illegal invaders.
That's right. And they want to get rid of the parents, but the children get to
Now it's
education. It makes no sense at all. Huh?
Yeah. People who said, oh, well, they've, the conservatives have nominated so many people on the court.
Yeah.
Not enough, apparently. Not enough true,
Yes,
true conservatives.
Not.